Hello, my name is Susan Hirata, and I'm the Programming Director for DisOrient. Thank you for joining us for our 17th annual DisOrient Asian American Film Festival of Oregon. For 17 years, DisOrient has maintained this platform to uplift the stories and voices of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. Today, it's my pleasure to host this conversation with the filmmakers of Food for the Rest of Us. Carolyn Cox is a Northwest Territories-based filmmaker who lives off-grid and specializes in projects that focus on the culture, environment, and lifestyles of Canada's far north. A self-taught cinematographer and editor, Caroline brings a raw, authentic lens to her storytelling in the remote part of Canada she has come to call home. She co-produced the film with Tiffany Ayalik. Tiffany is a Juno Award-winning musician and Inuk performing artist who performs Inuit-style throat singing with her sister Inukshuk Makai. Carolyn and Tiffany, welcome to DisOrient, and thank you for this film.
Hey,
thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really glad to sit down and talk to you both. So let's start by hearing a little bit about how you both met and what sparked the intention for this film.
Sure, I can start. So we're based in the Northwest Territories, which is in northern Canada, sort of at par with Alaska, but further east. And so my first big film project I did was called Wild Kitchen. And it was about people who would go harvest food off the land and sort of what motivated them to live that lifestyle. And we traveled around the north, and Tiffany was the host. So that's how we actually met. Was I was introduced to her as a potential host. So I hired her, and then the show did very well, and we got along great. And so we formed a production company together called Copper Quartz Media. And so it was really through that project, Wild Kitchen, and some of the success it had outside of the territory. It kind of blew up like outside of even Canada and the United States, and even in Europe we had quite a following. And so through that we started to meet other people online who were, living off the land and deeply connected to their food and where it came from. And that was where on social media we saw, specifically it was Eric Person from Kansas City, who we saw really advocating for farming as a form of activism. Like the idea when you grow your own food, you actually put the power back in your own hands and you can liberate yourself from oppressive systems. And we had never seen harvesting framed that way as a form of activism. So we loved it. And we just started doing research, and that's what led to the film.
Yeah, we've been involved with, different, food movements for such a long time. And Caroline lives, has spent lots of time in the north, living off grid, foraging and harvesting her own food. And I also come from an Inuit hunting background as well. And so we kind of were able to bridge our, two separate experiences together and cover a lot of ground experientially to come up with this project to really shine a light on, especially within marginalized groups, who has access to food, who has access to land, and how is food being mobilized as a really potent force for anti-oppression within these groups. So yeah, it's been really cool to see this grow out of the north and come to you folks in Oregon and go into Hawaii and go into the Midwest as well, and also be still rooted in the Arctic. So we're pretty proud of the Arctic seed that this film came from.
Yeah, I love it. And it's such an important topic. I love that you made this film. It's just really important, and it hits a lot of social justice notes just when you talk about food, really, like you said. So I'm going to read this quote that I really like. Might have been Caroline, it might be from you. I think you're talking about food, and it says, "This is about politics. This is about activism. This is about liberation. At the forefront of these conversations were often the most marginalized people. The food movement looks completely different depending on the region, but the heart, the impulse is universal." So I'd like you both to talk about this in respect to the different communities in your film and maybe how you came across these beautiful, varied communities.
Sure, I can start if you want. So being based in the Northwest Territories, we came across the Tuktoyaktuk story quite organically. We'd worked with Jerry Thrasher in the past, and she came on as a co-producer on the film. And so she's from that region. Tiffany's home community is Kugluktuk, which is on the Arctic coast. And Tiffany could probably speak to it better than I can, just about the exorbitant food costs and the real changes socially in the last 100 years. And then now, right now in the last 10 years, the rapid changes to the climate and to the landscape because of climate change and how that's impacting people's ability to harvest food in the way they traditionally had. So yeah, that was the how we found the Arctic story. Eric person lives in Kansas and Kansas City. He lives in Atlanta now, but he was living in Kansas City, working at a school in a definitely lower income neighborhood, very racially diverse neighborhood that did have the impacts of redlining, where there was like systemic reasons that there was less services in that community. And so he was teaching youth at the school how to grow their own food and had a partnership with the school and was doing really great things, like very much on the ground in his community to teach people how to grow their own food. Zaria Malpika is the kosher slaughter butcher who is a woman, and in the Jewish practice, women aren't allowed to do that. And so she's really pushing against gender norms. And then we loved that we could show also her work with Queer Nature, which is a really amazing organization that is creating space in rural environments in like hunting survivalism for people in the LGBTQ community, which isn't always, it's not always safe and it's not always welcoming in those small rural communities. So yeah, that was really amazing work that was being done in the Colorado region. And then we went to Hawaii, where we met with Mau Organic Farm. And in our mind, they're kind of like a shining success story of what is possible because they're 20 years into their operation. And so they've really struggled and grown, and now at this point are like a flourishing organic farm that is Indigenous owned and is financially like a successful operation. But it also is a feeder program where they take local youth from a lower income community, and if they work for 2 years on the farm as interns, they get their post-secondary paid for. So it's lifting up the whole community and then rooting the teachings in these like ancestral practices around land use. So yeah, those are the 4 stories in the film.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I think something that's really amazing about how Caroline and Graham Withers, the editor, how they really structured the storytelling of it is to show that, you know, this concept, like this spark of Indigenous sovereignty or land connection or cultural reconnection and land use is going to look completely different in Tuktoyaktuk in the high Arctic than it does in Hawaii. And what's really amazing is like that spark that is like so universal within each of these like very geographically diverse and historically diverse, culturally diverse locations and people, that, you know, they are the ones that have the answers about how to move forward in a good way. And they are the ones that we should be looking to ensure that these are like from the ground up, literally growing pun, you know, these are, you know, from the ground up solutions. Because I think what tends to be a sticking point is these kind of like superimposed solutions of like, oh, well, this works in, you know, the Midwest and the States, and clearly this will work in the Arctic, when it's just like, nope, sorry, that's not going to work up here. So I think what is a really cool thing about this film and about these stories is like the amazing spectrum and diversity of solutions that like actual people on the ground are coming up with, and that they're doing the work. We just need to support them and look to them because they've done a lot of the hard work already. They just need the lift. And that, yeah, there's no such thing as one size fits all. You know, it's really important to have as diverse and as wild and as, you know, varied solutions as we can moving forward responsibly and sustainably.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really what makes your film so important, is that it uplifts these voices of Indigenous people who already have figured it out a long time ago, and are bringing that forward now, and using their voices to a larger global population to just go back to the essence of what it is to be human, maybe, and having to eat, and how you do that, and how you relate to the land. I think that's so important. I really admired Jerry Thrasher. I thought she spoke so eloquently in the film. Maybe Tiffany, can you speak a little more about that community and her?
Totally. Yeah. Jerry's amazing. Our other co-producer, she's Inuvialuit. She's Inuk from the Western Arctic, very close to Alaska. There's lots of cousins that straddle the Alaskan and Northwest Territories kind of regions. There's a lot of, before artificial lines were drawn in the sand, cousins could move freely from from east to west. So yeah, so there's a lot of affinity, I know, for other Arctic Indigenous people in the States as well, seeing and being recognized for experiences that people in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk go through. And yeah, Jerry is an amazing, powerhouse of a person and artist, and she's a filmmaker as well, who's done some really amazing work from her communities, and a huge advocate for language and culture as well. And living in the high Arctic and being from a smaller community as well, these Jerry and her her community are the ones who are on the daily basis, wondering like, okay, do I spend the $50 on a sack of flour, at the grocery store, or do I spend the $50 on, something else that's quite essential? And it's like, nobody understands the exorbitant cost of literally everything in the Arctic. And, I think that's one of the things that goes into this toughness of spirit, and this, way and energy that Jerry has about like this, how is this okay? Like the very, earned outrage at a system that continually fails Indigenous people, especially in remote communities, is really defies comprehension until you go there. And I think that a lot of people from urban centers don't think about like, 1 liter of milk being $9, that is disproportionate to the level of income that people have. And that takes its toll culturally, that takes its toll on the mental health of people who live there, on a myriad of other issues, that promotes overcrowding. There's all kinds of things that the inaccessibility to food contributes to so many different social issues. And it's never just food, and it's especially in the Arctic and anywhere, it's never just food. It's never just about like where your next meal comes from. It is connected to the really brutal histories of colonization in the Arctic as well. And the forcing and relocation of people to stay in one spot who were traditionally nomadic and could roam anywhere. So there's a lot of accountability that needs to happen on the sides of government and different colonial powers to help us get our food back, because if we can't feed ourselves, we're dependent. And that's another thing that's discussed a lot in the film, is dependency. And
Right.
once we can have our own food back and our ways to feed ourselves, that's where like liberation really comes from. So if we can help to separate ourselves from these systems, like Jerry talks about in the film, that's one step closer to like a really actualized way of being, where we're not beholden to anybody else, which I know I can really like feel Jerry so much in that, as my sister Inuk, I can really feel that deep frustration mirrored in a similar community to my own.
Well, I really loved, I think his name was Jonathan Elias in that film. It's so beautiful. And he was so like, kind of, well, I've never really gone beyond Yellowknife or something, like I'm just living in this little place and I just do this. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like, you know how to live this way, and you have the answers for us going forward. It was just it's just so beautiful seeing him there and what he does and I imagine the knowledge he has of just how to survive and eat, forage. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I loved about Jonathan too was he was so humble and like so
Yes.
skilled in what he was doing. Him and his dad
Exactly.
just so easily, and he kind of pauses at one point and he's just like, but we're rich people.
Yeah.
And when you think of what richness is in a sort of capitalistic, consumeristic world, but he is really aware of like the richness and the value of that time on the land, even if he's like more humble in how he says it. So
Yeah.
I also thought it was a beautiful moment in the film when they were pulling the fish in.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I was really moved by Eric, the work that he does. And he has this point in this film where, he's kind of choked up and he's saying something like growing food is healing, and talking about how it has healed the community there and how it brings healing. Maybe can you talk about that a little? And how did you know he was there and, find him?
Yeah. So with Eric, well, we found Eric, like I said, through Instagram, like early on when he was sort of the nugget that sparked the whole idea of using farming as a form of activism. And I think with that emotion and that like talking about the healing, it kind of brings up this idea of the whole tone of the film. And when we first started it, we for sure wanted younger people and a more progressive, like edgy vibe, but we thought it would be a lot more like, marching in the street and like that real like activism, like fighting spirit. But it ended up there was a real spiritual message and a message of healing, not only within Eric's story, but within every story. And it came about quite organically, and it was kind of unexpected. And so that actually became like a big through the whole film was this healing and spiritual value and ancestral teachings, and how important it was and how healing that was to reconnect with the ancestors. But yeah, it was we're very grateful for how vulnerable Eric was and how openly he shared his experiences, and also like some other folks in the film were quite vulnerable and shared quite a bit, and were very just authentic, and yeah, it was really we're just very grateful that they shared that part of themselves with us.
Yeah, that's what really makes the film so powerful, is that authenticity and vulnerability, and the way that they all speak about this thing that they are all so passionate about and they know the importance of, and they're willing to share it with all of us. Like I think Camuela at Ma'o Farms said something about growing food as having agency. And I know in Hawaii how their food supply system is just crazy. They should be able to grow most of their food, if not all of it. And so much is relied on food being shipped in a long ways away. And so it was really beautiful to see that farm, like you said, thriving. And really interesting, his comments about the valley and the percentage that was owned by the military and the impact on that community. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about that? Just being there and
Yeah, everybody in Hawaii, we were so also blessed with these amazing personalities and, these people who are deeply, deeply connected to their own communities and the work that they're doing. And we're so grateful for the gifts of all of those people, because they were really showing us, again, this like ground roots, frontline versions of this work, and also this deep spiritual work that Caroline is talking about, of reconnection. And it's funny to see the powers of things like government control and colonization as Canadians, what it looks like through our lens, to be seeing something like military occupation as put into the words of military occupation by, different folks in Hawaii. And this was all around the time when Mauna Kea was definitely like super high on everybody's, list, and lots of stuff was being talked about in the news. And there's a dump that was getting put in, right? Lots of lobbying to put a new dump very close to, extremely fertile, amazing, lush valley that could be producing so much more food, but would be just a dump. So there's like lots and lots going on when we were there. And so I think a lot of that is also really showing in the way that people talk about this reclamation and this access to land work. And so yeah, for us to be, our tiny Canadian crew to be down there witnessing someone else, another mostly Indigenous viewpoint of what, continual colonization, especially because it's been, I think their 99-year lease or something is coming up soon on with the military. So to be seeing like a century's worth of that space was really interesting, and how it's not just them taking up space, but like taking up water and rediverting huge amounts of water that would have otherwise gone into keeping rich, fertile farmland going. And so, yeah, it was just really, really incredibly humbling and fascinating to be welcomed into another community in the work that they're doing, and to also be sharing like, hey, you guys haven't met, but you've got some like kindred spirits
Absolutely.
thousands of kilometers up in the Arctic at a different ocean, who are doing similar work in a tiny little geodesic dome with like a tiny little, string of peas, with Inuit who, have never tasted fresh mint for the first time. So, I think that was a really cool distance bonding opportunity, that like, even though they've never met, to know that there are other people across the world, across the continent, who are doing similar work, I think was really cool for everybody in the film to know about, because I think a lot of people feel really isolated in the work that they're doing, especially because they're, going up against these huge powers, and it can feel really isolating. So we're hoping that is like another ripple of the film, is to let viewers also know that there's other work like this going on that maybe they don't know about yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Caroline, do you have anything else to say about that?
Yeah, about Hawaii. I mean, Tiffany really talked about it quite well, but I didn't know until we started researching this film that 80% of the food was shipped into Hawaii. And it is crazy to think about, because they do have some of the richest soil and the richest growing conditions. And it is 100% because of lack of access to land that they aren't able to sustain themselves. And just knowing that, if the ports ever were inaccessible for whatever reason, like a tsunami or anything, then there would like literally be chaos in Hawaii, because they wouldn't be able to feed themselves. And it's completely unnecessary. And there are people who want to grow the food, and between plantations and the military and resorts, and like behind Mao Organic Farm, there's an old riverbed, and we didn't have enough time to put it in the film, but it's just a completely dried out riverbed because all the water's been diverted away. And the way that they water the fields at Mao is to have irrigation. So you need to like pay municipal water lines to water your vegetables. So even that is like a prohibitive cost right off the top, that you need to be able to afford that amount of water. So it just was really eye-opening for me to go to Hawaii and see that was the reality there.
Yeah. And I also I can't pronounce her name, the butcher and farmer in Colorado. How do you pronounce her name? Surya?
Yeah, Zuria Malpica.
Zuria, yeah. So she also just had this huge baseline of spiritual connection to the land, to the animals, in the work that she did, and everything. It looks like it pervasive through her life, this spirituality. Can you say a little bit about her? And also the people that she is teaching the classes. That was really fascinating.
Yeah. I went and filmed. I got in touch with Soen Pinar from Queer Nature first, and just went down for a day with my camera when I was doing development footage. And it happened to be the day that Zuria was coming to do the workshop. And I didn't know it was going to end up in the final film, but it just felt like a really special moment that was captured. And so between like both of those forces, you know, like Queer Nature and the work they're doing and the really great space they create, and like very sensitive to having people find their own way on their journey of connecting to the land, and especially when it's something like harvesting an animal and that actual, like, you know, they're talked about leading an animal to death, to the pathway of death. And you know, it was very moving and very, there was a lot of like respect and reverie for what was happening. And then through that I kept in touch with Zuria, and then wanted to bring a crew down and talk to her a bit more and learn more about what she was doing, because I also think she's very brave to be a female kosher butcher, and she does it because she feels spiritually called to have that responsibility, and then to like share the skills, but in a way that it's like you could be Jewish and want to, you know, learn that very specific ritualistic way of doing it that's grounded in like prayer and like I said, respect. But it's really open to anybody, and especially creating space for women and like the LGBTQ community, people who just are less often able to access those skills, whether it's like an overt like you are not welcome, or just a general, you know, distancing of those people in that environment. But yeah, I learned a lot from Zuria, and she's I think a lot of people who I've talked to who've seen the film have been very inspired by her, and I do love the moment where she's just like, doing this very male practice as a woman is kind of scary, you know. And I appreciate that vulnerability, and like as a filmmaker sometimes I, you know, I'm in that world too of like up in the Arctic with my camera, and it's kind of a little bit of a boy's world. And so I don't know, I just really have a lot of respect for Zuria and like the courage she brings to what she's doing.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so we're getting close to time. I just wanted to say these Indigenous practices and values, I feel like ultimately it's what is going to bring us back to wholeness, right? With the land, with each other, with our ancestors. And I feel like the communities in your film they provide a positive picture of what our future can look like. And I'd like your maybe final thoughts on that aspect of it. What you want your film to spark, or what you want people to take away from your film.
I think that one of the best and most bought into lies about capitalism is the great chopping, I call it, and the great severing of like, let's take this whole thing and chop it into as many useful and profitable parts and spread it out and spread it thin, and, you know, do that kind of spread of it into these separate compartments that we deem as profitable for as long as we can, at no matter the cost. And I feel like what has been shown in the film is, you know, the great calling back together, you know, bringing these disparate ways of being and land connection and connection to community and connection to ourselves and connection to earth and ancestors and all of these things that we are supposed to be, you know, way more in tune with, because then we'll be able to like diagnose and understand what's happening better. So I feel like each of these communities in their own way are kind of doing this beautiful work of calling back themselves, calling back practice, calling back, you know, the environment, how that used to be when they were, you know, younger. And I think that the biggest thing that we want to encourage people to do is just like think about their own communities and the space, the square footage that they take up, and who are the local food producers in their communities, because it's going to look different no matter where you are. And, you know, the best thing that we hear from people is like, oh, I didn't know that there was like a CSA program where I live, and now I like support my local, you know, farmer, or there's a butcher who I go directly to the meat to get my meat from, or a hunter. So I'm so honored that people take that message, and, you know, kind of in big and small ways are also important too, of reconnecting to their food and doing doing the holistic version and calling these separate parts of ourselves and our ways of being in the world back together. So that's what I think from a lot of diverse Indigenous groups and diverse, different, cultures, that's like a traditional value of so many people, that I think is being realized and actualized in really beautiful and diverse ways in the film. And we were just lucky enough to catch some of them.
Absolutely. Caroline, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tiffany summarized it very well. And just to follow up, maybe a little more of if you are making those decisions to buy local, like really asking yourself who does have access to land, and if there are reasons why people don't, especially systemic reasons, trying to support those people that might have those barriers, and advocating for change within your community. And again, it's going to look different wherever you are. And I really love something Camuela says, where he's like, the people might look different and the food we're growing might look different, but what we're doing is rooted in this ancestral teaching. And so also to just be really aware of the land you're living on, and like your own personal ancestral teachings, and then especially like the people who originally had the land use in that area, just to make sure you're being respectful and welcoming in that knowledge. So yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you both so much for taking the time to have this conversation, and very much thank you for the beautiful film and the thoughtfulness that you put out there around food and sustainability, and farming as a political action, growing food as a political action. I love it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, thanks again for having us.
Yeah.